I didn't realize anything was wrong until the board deck refused to open, just froze there, a blank white screen pulsing like it was breathing. I sat alone in the conference room, the air heavy with the faint smell of burnt coffee and someone's aggressively buttered toast drifting down the hallway. Our monthly board meeting was in less than an hour, and I needed to review one final slide, the one summarizing our clinical trial integration results. The slide I'd spent half the night refining. The slide that proved we were finally pulling ahead of our competitors. But when I clicked it, instead of seeing my neat rows of outcome improvements and risk stratification deltas, a system error popped up. Version conflict detected. I tried again. Same message. I pulled up revision history. That's when I saw it. Someone had edited the file at dawn, long before I arrived. And not just anyone. Nathan. My lead investor, board member. The man who loved to remind me, in his soft, condescending voice, that tone matters more than facts when you're a woman leading a science company. My chest tightened, not in that dramatic, cinematic way, but in the quiet, oppressive way that comes when you know you're seeing the first thread of something bigger. I clicked into the changes, expecting maybe a formatting tweak or a margin shift, something annoying but harmless. Instead, I found an entirely new slide inserted at the end, a slide titled, Leadership Transition Considerations. I stared at those words so long my eyes began to sting. The fluorescent lights above me flickered, humming unevenly like they were whispering along with my thoughts. Leadership Transition Considerations. Someone had typed this in my deck, someone with edit access, someone who didn't expect me to look before the meeting. My hand hovered over the mouse, my fingertips trembling. I scrolled down. Bullet points, clinical messaging alignment, investor confidence stabilization, potential interim CEO candidates. Then a name I recognized. A name I'd heard Nathan mention in passing, too casually, 2 weeks ago. A name he said belonged to a rising operator who might be a good advisor. Advisor, my ass. I closed the laptop, my pulse thudding against my ribs hard enough to make my breath stutter. The room felt smaller suddenly, the leather of the conference chairs carrying that faintly sour smell old furniture gets when it's been overused and undercleaned. A distant elevator dinged somewhere down the hall. Someone laughed near the kitchen, light, easy, unaware that my entire world had tilted. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, palms against my forehead. How long had this been happening? How many meetings had Nathan had without me? How many subtle shifts had I missed because I was too busy running this company, my company, to imagine the people who'd invested in me were plotting to replace me? My hands went cold, really cold. So cold I had to rub them together to feel anything, because the only thought in my head now was a simple, brutal one. If Nathan had gone this far, editing my board deck, planting transition language, then this wasn't just a power grab. It was already in motion. I breathed in, the air tasting faintly like paper and tension and betrayal. And that's when the truth settled into me with the weight of something permanent. Nathan wasn't advising me. He was grooming my replacement. I kept seeing that name on the transition slide even as I left the conference room and walked down the hallway, my heels tapping against the polished concrete floors, each step echoing like a countdown. The office was waking up around me, printers warming up with that faint toner smell, keyboards clacking in uneven rhythms, the soft hiss of the espresso machine sputtering a too-early latte for someone on the product team. Everything looked normal, ordinary, mundane. And none of it matched the storm tightening inside my chest. I stopped near the glass wall overlooking the lobby, gripping the steel railing because my balance felt off. That name, Evan Langford, kept flashing through my mind like a hostile pop-up ad. I'd met him once briefly at a genomics conference years ago. Tall, golden boy type, former COO of a diagnostics firm that crashed after inflating trial readiness metrics. Nathan had called him misunderstood when I brought it up. Now I knew why. I should have seen this earlier. Actually, I had. 3 months ago, the first seed of doubt sprouted in the most innocuous place. A downtown wine bar with tables too small and lighting too dim for serious business. Yet Nathan insisted it was perfect for a casual debrief. I remember he'd shown up in that fitted navy blazer. He wore to signal he was being helpful, nursing a glass of something expensive and swirling it like he was oxygenating his own ego. "We need to work on your tone," he said, smiling like he was delivering a compliment. "You're brilliant, Alexis, truly, but brilliance isn't enough. Investors need to feel handled." "Handled," I repeated, like I'm babysitting them. He laughed lightly, guided, softened, reassured. "I'm running a biotech company, not a preschool." He tilted his head, examining me the way someone evaluates a chess board. "Just consider it. You're a strong woman. Some people find strength abrasive." There it was, the first strike disguised as mentoring. I should have walked away then. I should have recognized the pattern. How men like him frame control as guidance, how they hide ambition behind support, how they practice the kind of benevolent sabotage that leaves no fingerprints and no smoking gun. But at the time, I told myself what so many Black women tell ourselves in rooms run by people who underestimate us: stay focused. Don't react. Get the job done. A week later came another moment, smaller but sharper. During a board prep call, I suggested tightening the risk adjustment model before we presented to Kaiser's expansion committee. Nathan didn't disagree. He just chuckled and said, "Alexis, you're overthinking again. Leave the executive polish to me, all right." To me. Not to the team. To him. Like he was my handler. I'd forced a smile. "I'll polish my own work." His silence in response had been long, too long. And now, standing there with the morning sun striping across my arms, I replayed that silence and realized it hadn't been annoyance. It had been calculation. Because Nathan had never believed I needed polishing. He believed I needed replacing. A cold ripple moved across my skin, like a draft from nowhere. I pulled out my phone with hands that still felt slightly numb and opened my messages, scrolling until I found the thread I avoided for almost a year. Renee, my old mentor from the Women in Biotech Fellowship. She warned me once about investors who smile while sharpening the knife. I hovered over her name, my thumb trembling. I didn't know what to say yet. I didn't know how deep this betrayal went. I only knew one thing, and the knowledge struck me with the force of something irreversible. If Nathan had already inserted Evan into my board deck, then he'd already convinced someone on the board to back him. And that meant I wasn't just fighting for leadership. I was fighting for survival. I walked back toward my office, trying to look composed even though my pulse was thudding in my ears like a second heartbeat. A couple of engineers passed me in the hallway, nodding good morning, unaware that everything under their feet was shifting. Someone reheated leftover curry in the kitchen, the smell sharp and distracting, mixing with the faint chemical tang of fresh printer toner drifting from the copy room. Normal smells. Normal morning. Nothing in the air hinted at the quiet mutiny unfolding above them. I shut my office door and leaned against it for a moment, the cool glass pressing between my shoulder blades. My monitor was already awake, still displaying the spreadsheet I'd been working on last night, our updated real-world data cohort from the diabetic neuropathy study. Clean rows, solid improvements. The kind of numbers companies like ours dream about during Series B season, numbers that should have protected me. But numbers don't protect you when someone decides you're replaceable. I dropped into my chair and opened our internal dashboard, scanning activity logs not because I expected to find anything meaningful yet, but because I needed to do something. Anything. My jaw tightened as I remembered the early days with Nathan, before the snide comments, before the backhanded coaching, before the carefully masked condescension. When he'd seemed like an ally. Back when I thought his smile was genuine. We met at a genomics conference reception almost 3 years ago, standing near a table full of cheese cubes and grapes that looked like props. He'd been talking animatedly to a CFO I vaguely recognized, and I'd only caught pieces of the conversation, something about synthetic data, regulatory friction, and founders who don't understand optics. I should have registered that last part as a warning. Instead, I stepped closer, introduced myself, and he'd leaned in like he'd been waiting to meet me. "You're Alexis Ward," he said, eyes bright with recognition. "The woman building that clinical data harmonization engine. I've heard about you." I laughed because I thought he was exaggerating. I didn't realize anyone outside our pilot partners knew who we were. "Oh, trust me," he said, his signature phrase, the one I later learned was always the start of a lie. "People know. You're solving a headache the entire industry has learned to ignore." I remember his gaze traveling across the ballroom as if he were searching for someone to introduce me to, someone important, someone he could perform his generosity in front of. Then he refocused on me. "Let's talk. I've got ideas, connections, and frankly, you're doing something special I want in." He'd had the charm of a seasoned negotiator, the polished confidence investors practice in front of mirrors. The kind that makes you feel chosen, like you've been tapped for something significant. And in that moment, in that overheated ballroom full of biotech egos, it had felt like a breakthrough. Like he actually saw me. Like he believed in what I was building. We talked for nearly an hour, and for most of that time, I believed every word he said. 2 weeks later, he wired our first major check, a $3.2 million seed at an $11 million pre, along with an email congratulating me on the beginning of something spectacular. I'd framed that email once. It's somewhere in my desk drawer now, collecting dust. A Slack ping pulled me out of the memory. It was from Darren, one of our board members, the one I knew tended to side with Nathan whenever decisions split down the middle. "Morning. Quick question before the meeting. Did you finalize the transition talking points you mentioned last week?" My stomach dropped. Transition talking points. I never mentioned that. Ever. Not even close. I read the message again, each word slicing cleaner than the last. Someone had prepped him. Someone had primed him. Someone had used my name to build a narrative I hadn't even known existed. A chill crept up the back of my neck, settling at the base of my skull. If Darren believed I'd brought up transition planning, what had Nathan told the others? I typed back what transition points, then deleted it. Typed "call me," deleted that too. Everything felt dangerous now. I stared at the blinking cursor until my vision blurred, until I could almost feel the ground shifting beneath me, because this was no longer a subtle power play. This was a coordinated effort. And suddenly, one question rose loud and clear in my mind, so sharp it nearly cut the air around me. How long had Nathan been rewriting my story when I wasn't looking? I didn't answer Darren. I couldn't, not until I understood how deep this thing went. Instead, I locked my screen, grabbed my laptop, and walked briskly toward the one place in the building where no one ever bothered me. The storage room near the back, where we kept old trade show banners, extra monitors, and a mountain of unopened lab coats someone ordered in bulk before we had revenue. It always smelled faintly of cardboard and stale carpet, but it was quiet, neutral. A place where my thoughts didn't have to perform. I slipped inside, closed the door, and sat on a stack of unused office chairs. The silence buzzed faintly in my ears, broken occasionally by a distant elevator chime. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the board deck, Nathan's version of it. My fingers hovered above the trackpad. I felt a slight tremor, but not from fear this time. From fury. Quiet, controlled, calculated fury. I clicked into the slide titled Leadership Transition Considerations and studied it more closely. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't rushed. It was polished, formatted, and written in the same tone Nathan used in every memo he sent. He'd expected this slide to be seen, discussed, nodded at, probably even praised. But as I scanned it, something else caught my eye. A timestamp embedded in the document metadata. Edited at dawn. By a user with admin privileges. Not me. Not the operations team. Not finance. Just 2 people had that level of access, me and Nathan. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. D wanted it to look formal, sanctioned, like a conversation already in motion, like something I had agreed to. The temperature in the tiny storage room felt suddenly too warm. I slid my blazer off, draped it across my lap, and leaned closer to the screen. If this was part of a larger plan, there'd be more breadcrumbs. I opened our shared drive and typed Evan Langford's name into the search bar. Nothing. I tried advisor. Nothing. Transition. A few onboarding documents. Then I tried the oldest trick in the book, searching by fragments, initials, partial file names. That's when something flickered. A document titled simply, EL Prep. No full name, no description, just those letters and a dash. I clicked it before I could second-guess myself. It was a script, a full-blown CEO transition pitch script. Not for the board. For Evan. Talking points about our roadmap. A summary of our clinical data integration pipeline. Highlighted sections of our trial readiness projections I hadn't even shared with the full team yet. Notes about which board members were soft persuasion targets. And an outline of deliverables Evan should prepare ahead of the leadership shift. Leadership shift. Not transition. Shift. My breath caught hard enough that I had to shut my eyes. I felt lightheaded, like someone had punched all the air out of me without touching me. I tasted something metallic at the back of my tongue, a taste I recognized too well. The moment right before my survival instincts kicked in. I scrolled to the bottom of the document, hands starting to tremble. The final line was what made the room tilt. Al will need careful narrative framing to avoid emotional reaction. Al. Alexis. Ward. Me. Careful narrative framing. Avoid emotional reaction. My tone, I assumed. That's when the tremble in my hands stopped completely. Everything in me went still, quiet, razor-sharp, because now I knew. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't exploratory. This didn't start at dawn. This had been planned for months. A soft click sounded outside the storage room, footsteps passing by, maybe an engineer heading toward the kitchen, maybe nothing at all. But my entire body stiffened. I closed the document, my heartbeat settling into a pace that felt almost unnatural in its calm. I wasn't just being replaced. They were creating a narrative that made me complicit in my own removal. I closed the laptop slowly, deliberately, the faint scrape of aluminum against my palms steadying me. Someone had rewritten my future behind my back. Now I needed to rewrite theirs. I left the storage room with my laptop pressed tight against my ribs like it was something fragile and alive. The hallway lights seemed harsher now, glaring down in long fluorescent strips that buzzed with the same low, electric agitation I felt spreading beneath my skin. I walked past two analysts debating data normalization, past a designer fiddling with a tablet, past our receptionist who smiled warmly without realizing she was watching her CEO unravel in real time. Everything looked painfully normal. That was the cruelest part, how mutinies always hid in plain sight. Back in my office, I shut the door and sat in the dark for a moment, letting the hum of the building settle around me, letting the weight of the evidence press into me from every direction. The transition script, the board deck edits, the planted narrative, the quiet grooming of another man, another steady hand, who apparently possessed the tone Nathan found more palatable. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of my desk, feeling the faint groove where I'd accidentally nicked it with a binder 2 years ago. A small, stupid scar on cheap laminate, but right now, it felt like a reminder that I'd already bled for this company once. My first instinct was to call our outside counsel, not the general firm we used for contracts, our crisis attorney, the one we'd retained last year during a privacy scare dry run. I dialed her number and put the phone on speaker, pacing behind my chair. When she picked up, her voice was clipped, all business. Alexis, you okay? You sound not okay. I'm fine, I lied. I need to run something by you, hypothetically. Hypothetically, she echoed, already suspicious. Hypothetically, I repeated, tightening my grip on the chair back. If a board member made edits to a CEO's deck that implied leadership transition, without consent, without a vote, and without prior discussion, what would that mean? There was a pause, papers rustled, then her voice sharpened. Define implied. Explicit, named candidates. Another pause. Jesus, okay, hypothetically, that's a breach of fiduciary duty at minimum, potential coercion, maybe groundwork for a forced removal. But Alexis, hypothetical or not, what proof do you have? My throat tightened. Documents, metadata, a script. A script, she repeated slowly. For a CEO transition pitch, he prepared for someone else. More silence. I could almost feel her thinking through the phone. Then, listen carefully. Evidence is one thing. Proof that will survive scrutiny is another. Whatever you do, do not confront him yet. I wasn't planning to. Good, because if you move too early, he'll claim you're unstable, paranoid, or emotional. He already tried that, I muttered. Of course he did, she sighed. Alexis, I need you to document everything. But until you can establish intent in a way that's unimpeachable, no regulator or judge will touch this. And if the board is already leaning his way. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I hear you, I said. Do not move, alone. We ended the call, but the words clung to me like static. Evidence or proof. The difference felt suddenly enormous, wide enough for a man like Nathan to build an entire narrative inside. A soft knock sounded on my door. I tensed. It was Clara, one of our junior data scientists, holding 2 coffee cups and shifting nervously. I, thought you might want this. You didn't look great earlier. I forced a smile. Thanks, just board prep stress. She nodded, believing me. Why wouldn't she? I'd always been the steady one, the unshakable one. As soon as she left, I locked the door again. Before I could sit down, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Haven't heard from you in days. You eating, sleeping, alive? I swallowed hard. My reflection in the window looked like someone who was only one of those 3. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and stared at the empty search bar, the cursor blinking like a question. My counsel's warning echoed in my ears. Do not move alone. But that was exactly how I felt, alone in a room full of shadows wearing other people's faces. I ran a hand over my scalp, grounding myself, trying to breathe through the rising panic tightening my throat. No one believed me yet. No one knew what I'd found. And the board meeting was in less than 30 minutes. No one was coming to save me. If I wanted to survive this, I'd have to find the one person who had never lied to me about power. And I knew exactly who that was. I scrolled through my contacts, past investors, past advisors, past employees who were too junior to drag into a silent war they'd never see coming. My finger hesitated at a name I hadn't tapped in nearly a year, Maya. Former colleague, former friend. A forensic data analyst who'd left our company on good terms but with a clear warning. Alexis, one day someone's going to try you. Make sure you've got someone in your corner who knows where bodies get buried in metadata. I'd laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. The memory of her voice, sharp, dry, always 3 steps ahead, stirred something in my chest that felt dangerously close to relief. She'd understand the evidence. She'd know how to help me build the kind of airtight case my attorney insisted on. And most importantly, she had no loyalty to Nathan. She didn't owe him anything. She didn't play politics. My thumb hovered over her name, nerves buzzing under my skin like low-voltage static. I typed, need a friend, not official. You available tonight? I stared at the message, chest tight. Then, before I could overthink it, I hit send. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Bring coffee, I'll clear my night. Sounds like a long one. My breath left me in a sharp exhale, something unclenching between my ribs. I hadn't even told her what happened, but she'd understood the tone. The urgency. The crack in my usually composed exterior. I typed back, thank you. She responded with a single line, who fucked you over? A shaky laugh slipped out of me, quiet but real. God, I'd missed her. The building's HVAC kicked on, rattling the vent above my door, and the sudden blast of recycled air made the ends of my fingers tingle. I forced myself to move, to prepare, to act like someone who wasn't a minute away from unraveling. I opened a clean folder, one that I'd encrypted months ago for a totally unrelated reason, and copied in everything I'd found that morning. The board deck, the transition script, the metadata captures, even the Slack message from Darren. As each file slid into place, a cold certainty settled into me. Maya wasn't just a friend. She was my best shot at surviving this. She understood patterns, digital, behavioral, psychological. She saw through manipulation the way some people saw through cheap wine. And if Nathan thought he could orchestrate my downfall without me gathering the receipts, he'd clearly forgotten who I was. My phone buzzed again, this time a calendar alert. The board meeting was starting in 10 minutes. A dull throb pulsed behind my eyes, heavy as a migraine threatening to surface. For a moment, I pressed both hands against the edge of my desk, letting the pressure steady me. I wasn't going to expose anything today. I wasn't going to flinch or panic or let Nathan see even a flicker of fear. I would walk into that conference room with the same calm efficiency I'd built this company with. Because survival wasn't just about evidence. It was about performance, timing, precision. I grabbed my laptop, my notes, my blazer, and walked out of my office with my spine straightened and my expression neutral. Every step toward the boardroom felt heavier, more deliberate. I could already hear muffled voices inside, Nathan's among them, smooth and warm like he owned the air. But he didn't. Not yet. I texted Maya, one more line, before reaching for the conference room handle. Tonight, I show you everything. Her reply came instantly. Good, because we're going to nail him, but we do it right. A fresh steadiness washed over me, sharp and bracing. Tonight was the beginning of the end, for Nathan. The boardroom smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and over-roasted beans from the carafe someone had set on the side table. The overhead lights were too bright, clinical, interrogation bright, washing everyone's faces into flat, unreadable masks. I stepped inside with my laptop clutched casually under one arm, praying my heartbeat wasn't audible. Nathan sat near the head of the table, his blazer crisp, posture relaxed, smiling that easy, polished smile he'd perfected over years of manipulating founders into trusting him. "Alexis," he said warmly, like he hadn't violated the sanctity of my own board deck that morning. "Glad you're here. I wanted to touch base before we dive in just alignment stuff." I stayed standing, forcing a patient expression. "We'll cover alignment during the meeting." His eyes flickered, just for a second, but I saw the annoyance. I always saw it, even when he hid it behind charm. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Sit. We've all been curious about your revised projections." I sat, but my laptop remained closed in front of me. Darren gave me a polite nod. Miriam, our newest board member, looked mildly stressed, her knee bouncing, her nails tapping against her mug. She wasn't part of the conspiracy, at least not knowingly. She was too earnest for that. Nathan cleared his throat. "Before Alexis presents, I'd like to." "No," I said calmly. "We'll begin with the operational updates as planned." He blinked, surprised. "It's just a quick note." "We'll stay on agenda," I repeated, voice even, steady. My attorney's warnings echoed in my mind. Don't let him claim volatility. Don't give him anything to weaponize. Nathan leaned back, smile tightening at the edges. "Of course," he said, "if that's what you prefer." We went through the first few slides without incident. My voice felt steady, trained, almost unnervingly calm as I walked them through clinical outcomes, cohort expansions, and our Kaiser pipeline. I didn't look at Nathan unless I had to. The whole time, his foot tapped beneath the table almost imperceptibly, anticipatory, impatient. When I reached the final section, I clicked forward, and the slide he'd inserted earlier did not appear. I'd replaced it with a clean version 30 minutes before the meeting. The real deck, my deck. Nathan's eyes flared. I kept my tone neutral. "Any questions before we move on to budget discussion?" Silence, thick, suspicious. Darren glanced at Nathan, almost unconsciously, as if waiting for a cue that never came. Miriam seemed confused but didn't ask anything. It felt like watching a script fail to load. Their plan required the transition slide. Without it, they had no runway, no opening to express concerns, no staged segue into Evan's qualifications. Nathan folded his hands, a practiced gesture. "Actually," he said lightly, "I'd like to revisit one of the points you mentioned last week, Alexis. the discussion around transition planning. My pulse spiked. So did the air in the room, going still and sharp like a held breath. I tilted my head. Which discussion? He smiled like a parent, indulging a stubborn child. The one you initiated about leadership continuity. I never initiated that, I said level. Ever. His eyes narrowed, not enough for the others to notice, but enough for me to see the exact moment he realized I'd found the slide. Found the script. Found everything. Perhaps you don't recall. I recall perfectly, I said quietly. Now the tension in the room was tangible, humming between the walls. Darren shifted uneasily. Miriam looked from him to me, sensing something but unsure what. Nathan's voice softened. Alexis, no one is questioning your value, but boards expect proactive planning. Tone matters in these things. There it was again, tone. The word hit my nerves like a live wire. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, I leaned forward just slightly and said, "We can discuss future planning next quarter. Today, we follow the agenda." The air turned heavier with unspoken challenge. Nathan held my gaze, calculating. He wasn't used to losing control of the narrative. He would soon lose much more. Because tonight, I'd be sitting across from Maya with every piece of evidence he never thought I'd find. And together, we'd dismantle him. By the time the board meeting wrapped, my jaw ached from clenching it behind polite smiles. Nathan tried twice more to steer the conversation toward role clarity and strategic leadership needs. But each time I redirected with the kind of hyper-controlled composure that left a thin sheen of sweat along my spine. When it finally adjourned, he gave me a knowing half-smile, as if this were a game and I'd merely delayed an inevitable checkmate. I walked out without looking back. My legs felt stiff, mechanical, carrying me through the office on autopilot. Someone reheated popcorn, the buttery smell thick in the air, mixing with the plasticky scent of hot electronics from the dev corner. Every sensory detail felt strangely sharp, like my brain was cataloging the moment out of sheer self-preservation. By the time I reached my apartment hours later, exhaustion had settled into my bones, heavy as wet cement. I tossed my bag onto the couch, kicked my shoes off, and stood there in the quiet, letting the city noise filter in through the windows. Sirens in the distance, someone yelling half-heartedly on the street below, the whir of a passing bus. Then my phone buzzed. "Outside your building. 2 coffees, open up." I cracked a tired smile. Maya always direct. I buzzed her in. 30 seconds later, she stepped inside wearing a hoodie, leggings, and that expression she reserved for disasters. Alert, focused, slightly amused by the chaos humans constantly inflict on themselves. She handed me a cup. "Extra shot. You look like you need it." "I do." She dropped her backpack on my dining table and unzipped it, revealing a laptop covered in stickers, cybersecurity conferences, a cartoon brain with binary streaming from it, and a small holographic one that simply said "trust nothing." She gestured. "Sit. Start talking." I sat and I talked. I told her everything: the board deck, the transition slide, the script, the metadata, the Slack message from Darren. As I spoke, she listened with a stillness that made me feel both seen and dissected. Occasionally she typed something. Occasionally she swore softly under her breath. Occasionally her brows knit in a way that told me she was connecting dots I hadn't even noticed yet. When I finished, she leaned back and tapped her pen against her notebook. "Okay," she said finally. "First, I'm sorry. This is some grade-A Silicon Valley fuckery." A broken laugh escaped me. "Yeah, I noticed." "But second," she continued, "you're not imagining anything. This is coordinated. And if he drafted a script for a replacement CEO, he's deep in it." "I know," my throat tightened. "I just don't know how to prove intent." She lifted her chin, eyes sharpening. "That's why I'm here. Show me the files." I opened my laptop, the glow lighting both our faces. She moved closer, elbows on the table, reading with clinical precision. Sometimes her fingers hovered near the screen. Sometimes she murmured, "That's sloppy." Or, "He didn't think you'd check this metadata." Or, "Jesus, he really underestimated you." Her confidence steadied something in me. After 20 minutes, she sat back and exhaled. All right, here's what we do. We build a mirror environment, duplicate his documents, extract every hidden revision, track author changes, cross-reference timestamps against server activity. We map his actions into a timeline. How long? 2 weeks, she shrugged. Maybe less if he's as arrogant as he seems. I rubbed my palms together, the faint tremor from earlier returning. And then what? She met my eyes. Then we hand him the shovel he's been digging with. A silence settled between us, a charged electric one. Then I whispered, "We're really doing this." Maya nodded, a slow, almost predatory smile forming. "Alexis, we're going to bury him properly." A rush of something fierce surged through me. Fear, yes, but also purpose. Power I hadn't felt in weeks. Tonight was the beginning. Tomorrow, the trap began. I barely slept the night before the confrontation. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words from Nathan's script, careful narrative framing to avoid emotional reaction, floating behind my eyelids like ghosts. By dawn, my apartment felt claustrophobic and stale, thick with the leftover scent of last night's takeout and the hum of my refrigerator vibrating louder than usual. I showered, dressed, tied my hair back, and practiced keeping my face still. Neutral. Controlled. A mask so flawless even I couldn't see through it. Maya arrived before sunrise, coffee in hand, eyes sharp. "Today's the day," she said simply. I nodded. My heart was steady, not calm, but steady, like the moments before a needle pierces skin. We went over the timeline one more time, our laptops open side by side at my dining table. The evidence was airtight. Metadata trails, unauthorized revisions, timestamp matches, back-channel communications. A neat, devastating arc. "Remember," Maya said, zipping up her bag, "you lead with one piece, then another. Don't show your whole hand at once." "And the recorder." She tapped her phone. "Ready when you are." By the time we reached the office, my fingertips tingled with adrenaline. The building smelled faintly of someone's microwaved breakfast sandwich and that dry, dusty scent of sun-warmed carpet. I headed straight for my office. At exactly 9, Maya slipped into the doorway and nodded. "He's here." I inhaled once, slow and grounding, then stepped out to find him. Nathan was in the small conference room at the end of the hall, scrolling on his phone, radiating unearned calm. He looked up when I entered, smiling like he was about to offer me wisdom I didn't ask for. "Alexis," he said, "everything all right? You sounded urgent in your message." I didn't smile. "We need to talk." He gestured toward a chair, pretending this was just another routine check-in. I didn't sit. Not yet. "Sure," he said, folding his hands. "What's on your mind?" I placed my laptop on the table and clicked it open. "Your edits." A flicker barely there crossed his face. "My edits." "Yes." I rotated the screen toward him. "This slide wasn't in my board deck." He glanced at it, expression mild. "Ah, that. I added a preliminary outline for future leadership planning. Totally standard." Standard without a board vote, or the CEO's knowledge. His jaw tightened by a millimeter. "Alexis, there's no need to be defensive. This is about long-term stability." "Whose stability?" I asked softly. He exhaled through his nose. "Look, I know these conversations can feel uncomfortable, but this isn't personal." "It feels personal." "It isn't," he insisted. "You're brilliant, but brilliance isn't the same as leadership longevity." "Is that what you told the board?" I asked. A pause, small but fatal. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice cooling. I clicked to the next piece of evidence. "This script you wrote for Evan Langford." His entire body stilled. "Where did you get?" "You left it in our shared drive," I said. "Sloppy." His lips parted, then closed again. I watched his throat bob as he swallowed. "Alexis," he said slowly, "you're misinterpreting. That was hypothetical, exploratory." "No," I said. "This is a CEO transition brief, and you wrote it 2 months ago." He shifted in his seat, the leather squeaking softly beneath him. "You're reacting emotionally, which is exactly why." Try that word again, I said quietly. I dare you. His mouth snapped shut. I clicked again, metadata logs, unauthorized edits, back-channel communications. His face lost just a touch of color with each revelation. This is all circumstantial, he said, voice rising. You can't prove intent. Maya stepped into the doorway then, calm as a surgeon. Actually, she said, tapping her phone, she can. Nathan's head whipped toward her. Who are? I'm the person who built a forensic timeline, she said, crossing her arms. With matching server logs, revision histories, and a detailed map of every action you took to undermine her. He stood abruptly. This is illegal, recording without consent. You're in a private workplace, Maya said. And I announced myself. You continued talking. That's consent. His breath stuttered. You set me up. I stepped closer, letting him see the steadiness in my face. No, you set yourself up. I just made sure the truth couldn't be buried. For a long, brittle moment, he just stared at me, calculating, unraveling, disbelief and panic colliding in his eyes. You won't recover from this, he whispered. I already have, I said. His phone buzzed then, 3 rapid notifications. Access revocations, security flags, board summons. He glanced down, and I watched almost clinically as the realization hit him. His power was gone. His face collapsed, the defeat unmistakable. And it was only the beginning. The moment security suspended Nathan's access, a strange, electric quiet settled over the office, like the air itself was holding its breath. He stood there frozen, one hand gripping his phone so tightly I half expected the screen to crack. Behind him, the lights hummed gently, indifferent to the implosion happening in this tiny conference room. He looked smaller, not physically. He was still tall, still broad-shouldered in that curated CO-adjacent way, but the confidence that usually radiated off him had drained completely. His shoulders sagged, his mouth hung slightly open, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't seem to have a script ready. You can't do this, he said finally, voice frayed. Alexis, listen to me, this isn't the way. I ignored him. Maya stepped closer, her expression hard as steel. Your board summons is in your inbox, she said. Special session, effective immediately. He blinked rapidly like he hadn't heard right. A session without me. You'll be present, I said, just not on the side you're used to. His jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. He just stared at me with something I recognized instantly. Fear, not of losing his seat, but of losing the narrative. For people like Nathan, control wasn't a privilege, it was oxygen. By the time we walked him to the main boardroom, the atmosphere in the hallway had shifted. Word spreads fast in startup offices, even when everyone pretends it doesn't. People looked up from their monitors, sensing something seismic even if they didn't know the details. I kept my gaze forward, every step deliberate, measured. Nathan trailed behind us, his pace uneven. When we entered, the board members were already seated. Darren fidgeted relentlessly. Miriam looked pale. And Greg, our oldest investor, sat with his hands folded tightly, lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. Nathan took one look at them and tried to pull himself back into confidence. There's been a misunderstanding, he began, voice smoothing out. Alexis is. Sit, Greg said, not loudly, but with the authority of someone who'd seen this play out before. Nathan slowly lowered himself into a chair. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table. My hands were steady now, my pulse slow. Maya stood by the wall, silent but grounded, her presence like a lighthouse cutting through fog. Alexis, Greg said, you requested this emergency review. Present your findings. I opened the folder. No shaking, no hesitation, just clarity. Over the last 3 months, I began, Nathan initiated and executed a covert plan to remove me as CEO without board authorization and without cause. Nathan scoffed, but no one looked at him. I continued, laying out evidence with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. The unauthorized document edits, the replacement CEO script, the metadata trails, the Slack misrepresentations. every piece stacked neatly atop the last, forming a structure too solid to dismiss. Miriam's hand flew to her mouth at one point. Darren shifted so many times in his seat the chair squeaked. Greg's expression never changed, but the muscle in his jaw tightened, pulse ticking in his temple. When I finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. "I never intended," Nathan started. "Stop," Greg said sharply. "Every action you took shows intent. Alexis is emotional." "Watch yourself," Miriam snapped before I could. Nathan swallowed. Greg leaned forward, eyes hard. "This board votes now." The vote wasn't dramatic, or loud, or drawn out. It was unanimous. Termination for cause. Immediate removal from all committees. Full investigation into misconduct. No severance. No advisory role. No quiet landing. Nathan didn't move as the words landed, didn't stand, didn't protest. His face simply drained of whatever confidence he had left. His phone buzzed again, access terminated from yet another system. He looked at me then, not with anger, not even with hatred. With disbelief. Because in his mind, I'd been the one he could control, reframe, replace. He never expected me to win. After the meeting, the board filed out one by one. Miriam touched my shoulder gently as she passed. "You did the right thing," she whispered. Darren didn't meet my eyes. Greg paused at the door. "Rebuild," he said simply, "and rebuild strong." When everyone was gone and the room was finally quiet, Maya let out a low whistle. "That," she said, "was art." I didn't feel triumphant, just emptied, exhausted down to the marrow. "It's over," I whispered. "Not yet," she said gently, "but he's finished." As Nathan left the building with security shadowing him, I watched silently from the conference room window. His shoulders looked different, not defeated. Collapsed. And for the first time since this began, I let myself breathe. For the first few days after Nathan's removal, the office felt like a house after a storm, quiet, unsettled, edges frayed. No one spoke openly about what happened, but you could feel it in the way people typed softer, the way conversations hushed when I walked by, the way our usually buzzing open floor plan carried an uneasy stillness. The air always smelled faintly of strong disinfectant and burnt espresso, like someone was trying to scrub the tension out of the place. I buried myself in work, or maybe buried isn't the right word. I clung to it: emails, investor updates, product reviews, back-to-back meetings. Anything to avoid sitting still long enough to process what I'd done, what I'd survived, what I still had to rebuild. The board required a full internal audit, so the following week was a blur of Zoom calls, metadata exports, formal statements, and compliance check-ins. Every time I thought I had a moment to breathe, another notification popped up demanding my attention. Regulatory bodies needed documentation. Our legal team needed timelines. Finance needed clarification. HR wanted to process the event. Technology needed access confirmations. My days blurred into each other, and my nights weren't much different. One night, well after dark, though I didn't look at a clock because I'd stopped trusting the feeling of time, I was in my office alone, the glow of the city reflecting across the windows. The smell of printer toner drifted from the copy room. The building's heat clicked softly through the vents. My back ached from hunching over spreadsheets for hours. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it until I saw the preview. Deposition schedule. Nathan Holt v. Helix Analytics. Involuntary departure review. My throat tightened. I answered. "Alexis Ward," an unfamiliar voice asked. "Yes." "This is Martin Reyes, counsel coordinating compliance for the internal review. I'll need you to confirm availability for deposition within the next 3 weeks." I stared at the blank whiteboard across my office, feeling my chest heat with a mix of exhaustion and anger. "Understood," I said. "Please prepare to answer questions regarding investor communication, board interactions, executive decision-making, and any concerns raised prior to the transition." Concerns raised. Interesting choice of words. "Fine," I said, Send me the full packet. We already have, he said. Check your inbox. The call ended. A hollow ache pulsed behind my eyes. I opened the email, scanned the attachments, and felt my stomach twist. Pages of formal language, legal threats, lists of evidence he wanted to dispute. Nathan was desperate, dangerous in his desperation. Cornered men always were. And then came the heaviest part. I had to testify. I leaned back slowly in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The HVAC hummed above me, a low mechanical thrum that felt too close to the sound of my own pulse. A knock tapped softly at my door. "Come in," I called, voice thin. Maya stepped inside, carrying 2 bottles of sparkling water and a bag of chips. "I figured you'd still be here." Her presence settled me instantly. "Nathan requested deposition," I said. "I saw," she replied, sinking into the chair opposite my desk. "He's flailing." "It's still going to be hell." "Yeah," she said, opening the chips. "But you've walked through hell before and didn't burn." I let out a shaky laugh. "That's poetic." "It's also true." She tossed me the other bottle. I unscrewed it, the cold condensation chilling my palm. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned forward slightly. "You know what this means, right? He's banking on you being too tired to fight." "I am tired," I murmured. "I know," she said softly, "but you're not done." She wasn't wrong. The next 3 weeks crawled by in a haze of legal prep. I gave multiple statements, reviewed document timelines, re-examined evidence until I could recite it from memory. Nathan's lawyer tried every angle: misinterpretation, miscommunication, founder bias, stress-induced paranoia. But Maya's timeline cut through the noise like a blade. The deposition itself felt endless. 6 hours under harsh fluorescent lighting, answering pointed questions while Nathan sat across the table, eyes hollow, jaw tense. He wouldn't look directly at me for the first hour. By the 3rd, he glared openly. By the 5th, he slumped in silence, replying only in half-hearted denials. At one point, his lawyer asked, "Did you confront Mr. Holt before verifying your suspicions?" I said, "I confronted him when I had proof your client created with his own hands." Nathan's jaw ticked. He didn't speak again. When it finally ended, I stepped outside the conference building into the cold air, breathing deep for the first time all day. My throat stung from hours of speaking, but the sharpness of the night made something inside me settle. We weren't fully through it. But he was breaking. And my company wasn't falling apart. It was surviving. Maya joined me on the sidewalk, handing me a fresh cup of coffee she'd grabbed while I wrapped up. "You did good," she said. "I'm exhausted." "Good," she replied, "means you're human." I managed a real smile. But even in that small victory, a question pulsed quietly beneath my ribs. If this was what surviving looked like, what would rebuilding cost? The months that followed were both endless and strangely compressed, like time had folded in on itself. Every week brought another round of paperwork, calls, disclosures, and regulatory reviews tied to Nathan's removal. The internal audit expanded into a full-blown investigation, and although I won every ruling, each victory came with a price. Hours of testimony, nights spent hunched over documents, and mornings waking up with my heart racing before my alarm even buzzed. For 8 months, I found myself saying one afternoon to Maya, "I feel like my life has been one long deposition." She didn't disagree. Even after Nathan's termination was finalized and the board formally censured him, the ripple effects kept hitting us. Some clients needed reassurance. Some investors wanted extra visibility. And some staff, those who'd once gravitated toward Nathan's polished confidence, watched me with a wary mix of curiosity and regret, as if only now realizing the ground they stood on had been carefully mined. Still, somehow, we kept moving forward. We secured new contracts, built new features, fixed lurking infrastructure issues nobody had noticed because so much attention had been funneled toward the fake crisis of my tone. 2 of our data engineers stepped up so consistently I promoted them both. Finance tightened processes, product matured, And even with the legal storm still raging in the background, the company began knitting itself back together. Then, in late fall, something shifted. Our Series B, once jeopardized by Nathan's maneuvering, closed at $10.4 million. The moment I received the final confirmation email, I sat back in my chair and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside my lungs since the day I found that first slide in my deck. The office smelled faintly of fresh paint. We'd just renovated one of the labs, and outside the conference room window, the trees lining the street were shedding the last of their red leaves. For once, the world felt open again. When I told Maya the news, she grinned so wide her dimples showed. "Told you," she said. "You didn't just survive him, you starved the ecosystem that fed him." That night, I stayed late to finish up the press release draft. The office was nearly empty except for the hum of servers and the faint scent of someone's forgotten herbal tea cooling on a desk nearby. I rubbed my temples, feeling the familiar ache settle behind my eyes. Leadership was heavy even on good days. I heard footsteps and looked up to see Darren standing awkwardly at my door, hands shoved into his pockets. He looked smaller than I remembered, less sure of himself. "Alexis," he said quietly. "Yes." He cleared his throat. I wanted to apologize. His voice cracked slightly. I should have asked questions sooner. I shouldn't have taken Nathan at his word. I studied him for a long moment. His shame was real. His regret was real. And he wasn't the only one who'd stayed silent too long. "Thank you," I said softly. "I appreciate that." He nodded, relief flickering across his face before he slipped out into the hallway again. Later that week, our lead investor, the one who had initially questioned my leadership presence during the crisis, called unexpectedly. I braced myself, heart tightening, but instead of condescension, his voice carried something new. "Respect. You've handled this with more composure than most seasoned CEOs," he said. "We're committed to backing you long-term." I thanked him, accepted the praise, but I felt it settle strangely in my chest. Because part of me couldn't help wondering, if I had broken, just once, would any of them have cared enough to understand why? The investigation eventually wrapped. The regulators closed their files. Nathan quietly settled to avoid further action, and according to whispers I didn't seek but inevitably heard, he took a consulting role with a mid-tier analytics firm 2 states away. No equity, no board seats, no leadership path. He'd locked his LinkedIn profile. His social posts stopped entirely. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt older. Not weaker, but changed in ways that reshaped how I carried myself. I triple-checked access logs now. I read contracts twice. I trusted people, but never without watching how they moved in rooms without me. Some nights I'd wake at 3 a.m, heart racing, certain I'd miss something. A detail, a clue, a threat. I'd sit there in the dark, breathing through the aftershocks, convincing myself the crisis was over. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. One particularly difficult night, I found myself walking into the kitchen, making tea just to have something warm in my hands. When I returned to my desk, I opened the folder where Maya and I kept the timeline, our digital scar, the record of what we'd survived. I didn't read it. I just stared at the file names and thought about everything it had cost to build that evidence to protect myself, to protect this company. And then, without fully meaning to, I whispered into the quiet room. "I'm still here." Because that was the truth. I was bruised, changed, wiser, more guarded, but still standing. And if you've ever been told your tone was the problem while someone quietly plotted to take everything you built, if you've ever had to stare down the people who underestimated you and hold your ground anyway, then you already understand why I had to tell this. Because surviving wasn't the victory. Surviving and staying myself was. And knowing someone out there hears this, someone who's been through their own version of the same battle, that's what kept me standing on the nights I couldn't sleep.